No by proxy.
I just recovered from locally marketed.
Mr. Ricketts.
No by proxy. Oh,
Here.
excuse me.
Mr. Sanders.
Aye.
Ms. Stabenow.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
No by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Mr. Wicker.
No by proxy.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
7 yeas to 10, the nays are 9.
The 9 of the nomination is favorably reported. My thanks to everybody who's changed their schedules in order to be here so we could get this done. We're now going to have the hearing with Shaylin Bott, the Federal Highway Administrator. Thanks, everyone, for coming, for joining us. This concludes the committee's votes as part of the business meeting today. I thank all of our members for your participation. I'll now recognize any member who would like to speak on the matter we have voted on. Does anybody want to speak on what we just voted on? The nomination of Mr. Barron. Hearing no requests. In closing, I'm delighted that our committee has voted to report to the Senate the nomination of Jeff Barron to continue to serve on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit additional materials related to this morning's vote for the record, including letters of support for Mr. Barron's nomination. I also ask unanimous consent that the staff has the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the matters approved today. I would repeat those unanimous consent requests. Is there objection?
Without, no.
Hearing no objection. With that, our business meeting is adjourned, and we're getting ready to start the second half of a day-night doubleheader. Hopefully it won't extend into the nighttime. I don't think it will. With that, I'm pleased to call this hearing to order. Welcome to all of our witnesses. Welcome to our guests. And special thanks to Senator Capito and our colleagues for being here for this important hearing. Today we're here to discuss the Federal Highway Administration's implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm enormously proud, and I know Senator Capito is as well, the work that this committee did in literally providing the foundation for the bipartisan infrastructure law. People say to me, and I'm sure they say to you, Senator Capito, when you travel back to West Virginia, around the country, why can't you guys and gals just work together and get stuff done? And as it turns out, in this committee, that's what we do. We reported out our parts of the bipartisan infrastructure legislation unanimously, 20 to zip. 10 Democrats, 10 Republicans, and we're proud to help lay the foundation for what's turned out to be one of the biggest investments in our nation's infrastructure ever, and it started right here in this room. So I think we made some history, and hopefully we'll continue to make that history going forward. Before we begin, I want to take just a moment to acknowledge the disaster that occurred this past weekend just north of Philadelphia. My wife and I live about five miles from the Pennsylvania line, so this was too close to home. And there's a lot of work that's been going on, and I know our witness today, Shaylin, has been up there for quite a time, and we'll hear a little bit about that as well. But on Sunday, a tanker truck carrying some 8,500 gallons of gasoline caught fire on the off-ramp, causing an overpass on I-95 literally to collapse, as we've probably all seen on television. Administrator Bott, who also goes by Administrator Bat, but I've always called him Administrator Bott, has already been to the site of the crash, I think a couple of times. He and his team are working to support state officials there as they seek to restore mobility on this critical corridor for our nation. I call I-95 is sort of like our nation's highway. It goes all the way from Maine all the way down to Florida, and the amount of traffic on that, which goes through my state, is just incredible. I want to thank our administrator and the rest of his team at the Federal Highway Administration for the important work that you are doing. We appreciate very much you being with us today. It's been a little more than 2 years since this committee unanimously marked up the highway bill that will go on to serve as the foundation of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And when we did, we noted that it included historic funding for our nation's highway programs. I also noted that it was included the first ever climate title in a bill of that nature. In our highway bill, we created the Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation, also known as the PROTECT program. We did so with the intent of improving the resilience of our transportation systems and reducing our vulnerability to extreme weather. We've all heard of the old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's certainly the case with investments in resilience. Building the protective features and natural infrastructure helps keep transportation assets to withstand disasters for years. And the earlier those protections are in place, the greater the benefit will be. With that in mind, I'm pleased that the Federal Highway Administration is now accepting applications for the first round of the Protect grants. It's my hope that the Federal Highway Administration works quickly to award these programs funds and begins to improve the resilience of the communities nationwide. Our bill also creates dedicated programs to develop electric vehicle or EV charging networks across our country. It also includes a 70% increase in funding for programs to build safe, accessible pedestrian and bicycle pathways across our country. In addition, our Surface Transportation Bill authorized the Reconnecting Communities program. This was the first ever federal program to address the safety and pollution impacts of highways that are divided and hurt neighborhoods in many places across our country. Importantly, not only did our highway bill focus on the critical issues of climate, safety, and equity, but it did so in a lasting, bipartisan way. As my colleagues have heard me say, Shayla, a million times, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. We're very proud that that's the approach we took with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But during that markup 2 years ago, I also noted that the infrastructure bill alone was not enough to address climate change. And once we passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, we got to work on legislation that eventually became the Inflation Reduction Act. Inflation Reduction Act authorized several new programs under the purview of the Federal Highway Administration. And this included a program to reduce the industrial emissions from construction materials, as well as funding to facilitate efficient environmental review and permitting times. The Inflation Reduction Act also provided funds to mitigate air, noise, and water pollution and other impacts to other impacts on highway infrastructure on disadvantaged communities. And together, the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act represent the most significant investment in clean energy and transportation infrastructure, as well as equity and climate resilience in our nation's history. Still, there's no shortage of work that remains to be done. There are key questions that the Federal Highway Administration must address around implementation, around regulation, and guidance. And that's why I'm delighted here to welcome our friend, not just from Delaware, but a friend who's actually been Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, in Colorado. He's worked with, I think, with US DOT and any number of other responsible positions to prepare him for this day. This is his first time before our committee since the Senate confirmed his nomination to be Administrator of the Federal Highway Administration by a voice vote in December 2022. We look forward to hearing your testimony today about the extensive work that you've led in the last 6 months or so. As I've noted, Congress provided the Federal Highway Administration with historic funding and the authorities necessary to revitalize highways across our country. The agency must also use its regulatory authority to address ongoing needs. One such need for regulation is to help reduce emissions from our transportation sector, which account for nearly 30% of our nation's greenhouse gas emissions, the largest single source in our economy. As my recollection, 30% of our emissions come from the cars, the vehicles, the trucks that we drive, cars, mobile sources. Another 25% comes from our power plants across the country, and another roughly 20% comes from our manufacturing base or manufacturing operations. But the biggest of those three is our roads, highways, and bridges. Last July, the Federal Highway Administration proposed a rule that would require states and metropolitan areas to measure their performance on greenhouse gas emissions and set targets to reduce those emissions. Once finalized, this will be a critical tool to steer infrastructure investments toward better climate outcomes, and I hope that the agency will move quickly to finalize that rule. And finally, I'd like to emphasize the importance of improving safety. Last year, nearly 40,000 people tragically lost their lives on our nation's roads, the highest number in 16 years. I'll say that again. Last year, nearly 43,000 people tragically lost their lives on our nation's roads, the highest number in 16 years. The U.S. Department of Transportation has taken an important step toward this goal by releasing its National Roadway safety strategy, which sets a goal of 0 fatalities for U.S. roads for the first time. 0 for the first time. Still, there's more work to do that the Federal Highway Administration can and should be doing to prioritize safety. That includes working with states, working with metropolitan areas, plan streets that are safe or safer for all users, and choosing highway designs and roadway designs that don't encourage speeding or other unsafe behavior. With that, we look forward to hearing about the work that Administrator Bott has done and will continue to do to advance these priorities. Before that, I want to turn to our ranking member, Senator Capito, whose leadership was critical to the passage of the infrastructure programs we're discussing today. Senator Capito, you are recognized for as long as you wish to speak.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, for calling today's hearing and your ongoing willingness to conduct oversight on the IIJA and the Inflation Reduction Act. Administrator Bott, it's very good to see you. I know that you've been extremely busy here over the last several days. Since your confirmation, you have maintained a very open line of communication with me and my staff, and I want to express our appreciation for doing that. I also want to thank your hardworking staff at the agency. I know they're working on a lot of different issues. I would also like to acknowledge the tragic incident on I-95 in Philadelphia. The pictures are just overwhelming, and I know you've been on the ground. I appreciate the responsiveness of the FHWA in providing assistance to the state of Pennsylvania. I know the investigation is underway, and Congress will be provided more information when it is available. I'm very proud that this committee, as the chairman said, developed the legislation that served as the foundation of the IIJA. And we did so together and bipartisan through regular order. I was proud to manage the bill on the floor with the chairman and to attend the signing ceremony at the White House. Unfortunately, our bipartisan product was jeopardized by this is before you got there, FHWA's December 2021 policy memorandum. But I want to thank you, Administrator Bott, for issuing a substantially revised policy memorandum that superseded the original one. I appreciate that you recognize the original memorandum diminished the bipartisan accomplishments of this committee and contradicted the statutory text and clear intent of the Congress. When the IIJA was signed into law, we promised the American people that the legislation would deliver results by improving our nation's core infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and we're starting to see real tangible benefits of that investment. In negotiating the legislation, I prioritized the inclusion of a robust project delivery and process improvement title that included the codification of the one federal decision policy for surface transportation projects. I look forward to receiving an update from you today on how the agency is implementing those provisions and others in the IIJA. Proper implementation of the law is the only way to see the full benefits of the IIJA. So now on to the inaptly named Inflation Reduction Act, which has not and will not reduce inflation. Following the passage of the IIJA, the administration embarked on a partisan exercise to pass what I believe are misguided policies through the budget reconciliation process. That effort began with the introduction of the so-called Build Back Better legislation in 2021 and culminated with President Biden signing the IRA into law in August of 2022. The original version of the reconciliation legislation included a provision that would have directed FHWA to establish a greenhouse gas emissions performance measure and associated targets. I challenged that provision as violating the Byrd Rule of the Congressional Budget Act, and that provision was stripped from the legislation. That removal of language was the second time since I became a ranking member of this committee that we have dealt with this policy. And that was the second time that Congress directly rejected FHWA the authority to establish a greenhouse gas performance measure and associated targets. Providing this authority to FHWA was also debated and ultimately left out of the bipartisan IIJA. The Biden administration, through your agency, is now attempting to impose, and the chairman just talked about this, impose a greenhouse gas emission performance measure and associated targets on state departments of transportation and metropolitan planning organizations without any authority from Congress. This rulemaking feels very similar to the December 2021 policy memorandum. Yet again, this administration is trying to implement partisan policies they wish had been included in the IIJA and the IRA through agency actions. I'm hopeful that under your leadership, this rulemaking for greenhouse gas performance measures and associated targets will not move forward. On a related note, I also want to express my concern with the proposal that the President's fiscal year 2024 budget request has. The budget request included legislative language that would repurpose $60 million in unobligated contract authority from the TIFIA program to the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. This is in the weeds, but I know you understand what I'm talking about. The IIJA did not provide contract authority for that program. It received an authorization, but it is subject to appropriations. This committee determines what programs receive contract authority and how much, not the department. I hope this is not something that your agency plans to pursue, as once again, the committee has already made a decision here. Finally, I want to raise an issue that is not directly related to either of the laws we are discussing today, but may have significant impact on how state DOTs manage their programs and their ability to move forward. I'm referring to the $3.5 billion discrepancy in contract authority between the two fiscal management systems known as FEMAS and Delphi. I appreciate that you brought this issue to my attention in January and look forward to receiving an update for you on how the DOT plans to resolve this discrepancy. In summary, the topics of our hearing today starkly contrast the different outcomes in quality and durability. We get great quality and durability when the Senate pursues bipartisan legislation through regular order. And if we compare that to a partisan legislation through budget reconciliation process that I believe falls short. Nevertheless, oversight of your implementation of these two laws is a critical function of this committee. I would like to take one moment to say farewell to a much beloved and incredible member of our staff over here, the Republican staff at EPW. Lauren Baker will be leaving us. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, but way, way too soon. And she really helped to shepherd the IIJA through our committee. She is an incredible resource. I know she'll be successful where she goes. But Lauren, we will miss her, and I know your department will miss her as well because of the great give and take that we've been able to have with her and through your department. So thank you for letting me bid Lauren a fond farewell.
Lauren, thank you for your work. One of the joys of working in this committee is working with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And it's not just member to member, but staffs as well. And to Adam and to Courtney and to members of our respective staffs, thank you for that great spirit. We send the example. We all heard trickle-down theory. And it also, when the leaders of a committee like this work together and reflect that kind of behavior, the staff picks up on it as well. And it's a good thing for us. So
Let's give her a round. Lauren, stand up.
Yeah. All right. Do you know where Lauren's going to go next? Where's she going to go?
Private sector.
Okay. All right. Before I turn it over to Shaylin Bott for his testimony, I just would note I want to drive into the train station in Delaware this morning. I was listening to NPR News, and they were giving us some updates. They announced with respect to the IRA. So people say the IRA doesn't really help reduce inflation, but then in the morning news this morning, we just learned that inflation continues to actually drop. And I think the annualized number is now down to 4%. And the last job creation number, we got just a report out of the Department of Labor a couple of weeks ago. The new jobs, 340,000 new jobs in the last month. And our unemployment rate for the country is still holding down around 3.5%, which is a pretty darn good number. And it's not perfect. There's still things we can still do better. But that ain't bad. And where I come from, that ain't bad. All right. Thank you, Senator Capito. We'll now hear from our witness, Shaylin Bott. Shaylin pronounces his name Bat, but a lot of us in Delaware pronounce it Bott. And bought and sold, like a batter to plate. But he'll answer to either one. But he's the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, sworn into his current role on January 13th, 2023, after being unanimously confirmed by the Senate on December 8th of last year. As administrator, Mr. Bott oversees an agency with more than 2,700 employees, which includes staff who work in all 50 states, U.S. territories as well, and the District of Columbia to carry out federal aid highway programs. Welcome, Shaylin. You may now proceed with your testimony. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These historic investments in our nation's infrastructure and new opportunities to build a clean energy economy that create good jobs and lower costs for working families. When I appeared before this committee for my confirmation hearing, I noted that FHWA staff have been working tirelessly. I have hit the ground running since being confirmed, and the dedication of FHWA staff in carrying out these laws and getting real results for the American public is inspiring. I've always said that a transportation agency exists for two reasons: to save lives and to make people's lives better. This past Monday, I joined members of the Pennsylvania congressional delegation as well as the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation Secretary in touring the site of the partial collapse in Philadelphia that occurred on Interstate 95 involving a truck fire which resulted in the tragic loss of life. The I-95 corridor is a vital connection for people and goods traveling along the East Coast. FHWA has offered support and assistance to state and local officials to help them safely reopen this section of I-95 as quickly as possible. We are working diligently with our divisions in all surrounding states, as well as with our sister agencies on emergency relief support and maximizing all best practices. Having led the Delaware Department of Transportation through the I-495 bridge emergency in 2014, I am critically aware of how important an artery I-95 is for the state, region, and nation. Every day of closure will affect people and freight on this vital corridor, and we are laser focused on working with our partners to get the road open as quickly as possible. In addition to our commitment to safety, FHWA's work is guided by an initiative we refer to as Driven for the 21st Century. There are 6 aspects of this initiative: delivery, resilience, innovation, values, equity, and our nation. Each of the six aspects of the Driven initiative guide our efforts to implement the many programs and funding opportunities authorized by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Delivery is the first aspect of Driven. Thanks to these acts, we have the funding necessary to make major improvements in our transportation system. FHWA has taken numerous actions that will support implementation of projects that improve safety and people's lives, including distributing more than $120 billion in highway formula funding to states and issuing notices of funding opportunity for approximately $4.6 billion in available funds. We're also administering nearly 900 awards totaling $7.5 billion across 9 discretionary programs. These are more than just numbers. These dollars means projects that will improve both safety and people's lives. FHWA has a long-standing practice of engaging with our stakeholders and providing technical assistance, but we have placed an even greater emphasis on these efforts since the passage of the legislation. FHWA is committed to supporting our stakeholders at the state, tribal, and local levels, and we have specific efforts in place to provide training and technical assistance. Resilience is an important part of building a modern transportation system, as it will help us keep our infrastructure strong and fulfill our most important duty: getting people where they need to go and getting them there safely. FHWA has already made significant progress in carrying out many funding programs that are specifically targeted at addressing climate change, including distributing funding under the Protect Formula Program and Carbon Reduction Program, and publishing a NOFO for the Protect Discretionary Grant Program. Innovation is essential for the future of transportation infrastructure. It will help us tackle a broad range of issues such as improving safety, increasing the resilience of our infrastructure, and finding new ways to combat the climate crisis. The current round of FHWA's Everyday Counts program supports innovation specifically aimed at climate change concerns, safety, and equity. While the tireless service of FHWA employees is evidenced by the quality of our transportation system, we are also responsible for the members of our agency. FHWA is committed to all of our core organizational values and caring for our staff. Equity is one of FHWA's primary values and drives every one of our programs, projects, and initiatives. Not only do the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act include programs specifically intended to address equity issues, but the historic investment in our infrastructure will benefit those who find well-paid work rebuilding their communities. And every aspect of FHWA's work is driven by the people and the nation that we serve. We must create a transportation system that delivers for our economy and all of our people while getting individuals and goods safely to their destination. A transportation system that literally unites us as Americans. Driven will allow us to deliver results for both the U.S. transportation system and Americans as a whole. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thanks for that testimony. I'm going to start our questioning, but asking you about the recent disaster that took place just north of us in Pennsylvania on I-95 near Philadelphia. And I know that from our conversations that you spent a fair amount of time there in the days since then. I understand that Governor Shapiro is making an announcement literally in real time as we're gathered here today, and that you might be in a position to comment on what he's saying a little bit later in our hearing, and I look forward to that. But to start off, could you just please talk with us this morning about the role that the Federal Highway Administration will play in coordinating with state and local agencies to respond to the bridge collapse and restore the movement of goods and people around the Philadelphia region while this bridge is being rebuilt?
Well, thank you, Chairman Carper. And as you and the ranking member mentioned, FHWA staff have been working tirelessly on bill. And I just want to highlight that in addition to standing up this law, which has been a lot of effort, we also have to deal with the sort of the business of keeping the federal highway system up and running. And I just want to highlight for the committee that on Sunday, when the calls started coming in, we had dozens of federal highway staff here in D.C., in Pennsylvania, just on calls all day long, and I just want to thank them for their efforts. I showed up in Philly on Sunday, met with PennDOT. I mean, the Secretary Carroll has been doing an amazing job of really marshaling the people there. They've got all the experts that they need. We are acutely aware of the impacts that this closure is having, not just on the city of Philadelphia or the state of Pennsylvania, but the region and the nation. Secretary Buttigieg went to visit yesterday and got a briefing. The president has asked for daily briefings on this project. So every lever that we can pull is being pulled. We released quick release funds last night for $3 million for the state of Pennsylvania, and the bulk of these costs will be covered by the ER program.
All right, thank you. Just as a follow-up, are there any initial takeaways that we can learn from this disaster that might help prevent similar disasters in the future?
Well, I think, Senator, I think, you are keenly aware of this and members of the committee, that just how critical our transportation system is. And I think sometimes we take it for granted that it just operates. And then when something like this happens, it becomes very apparent why these investments are so important, why this infrastructure is so important. And so I would say I think it will be important to wait for the NTSB investigation into the cause and learn any lessons that we can. But I think that I just feel like, having been in a lot of those meetings over the weekend and into yesterday, that truly when you just have all of these engineers trying to solve a problem and you have all of the experts in the room, there's just an amazing energy and unified focus. And I think you wouldn't be able to tell who were Democrats and who were Republicans in the room there. And I think that's emblematic of infrastructure solutions.
That's great. Thank you. My second question, then I'll yield to Senator Capito, deals with VMT pilot, vehicle miles traveled pilot. For more than a decade, federal fuel tax revenues have not kept up, as you know, with transportation investment needs. A dozen states have used federal funds to study vehicle miles traveled fees, and those pilots are showing some success, as you know. The bipartisan infrastructure law directs U.S. DOT to create an advisory board on funding alternatives and to undertake a national study of VMT fees. The goal of that work is to produce meaningful data that would provide timely input for the next reauthorization bill. Given that deadline, it is essential that the work begin quickly. Unfortunately, neither the advisory board nor the national study have been established yet. My question is, what is the timeline for the Federal Highway Administration setting up the advisory board and getting the national study underway?
Thank you, Senator, and I am aware of your interest in this particular program dating back to when I was the Secretary in Delaware and was part of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance.
I'm not a Johnny-come-lately on this issue.
Yes, and in Colorado, when I was the Vice Chair of the Western Road Usage Consortium, Road Usage Charge Consortium, and so we are going to work expeditiously to get the advisory committee set up, and we'll make sure that we get this important data for the committee as we look to reauthorize the program.
Great, thank you. That's good to hear. Music to my ears. Thanks very much. Senator Capito.
Thank you. In my opening statement, I talked about the debate that we had over the greenhouse gas emissions performance measure and targets that we had rejected it here in the Congress, and you are pursuing a measure that would achieve this through rulemaking. What is your response to what I said in my opening statement, and what authority do you have to be moving in this direction? Do you believe you have?
Thank you, Ranking Member Capito. And before I address that question, I would also like to echo your comments about Lauren. We will miss her grace and professional knowledge. So I would say my reaction to your comments is I hear you, and I heard you during my confirmation hearing about your concerns about the GHG piece. From the authority perspective, obviously we have lawyers at Federal Highways who will examine that, lawyers at US DOT. I believe MAP 21 did provide authority to measure the performance of the transportation system. And I think we are in an open rulemaking right now. We've received, I think, 40,000 comments from folks, and before we move forward in that rulemaking, we would want to understand all of those public comments.
Okay, so I probably need a little more clarity on what authority but we'll follow back up with you on that. Let's go to the PHMSA Delphi discrepancy that is definitely in the weeds, but very impactful for many states, including the smaller states. We had asked about this, how are you going to address this? And the quote that came back was, once the task force has completed its review, US DOT and FHWA will determine the type of adjustment required and the applicable authority. Seems like we need the authority before we can make the decision. Where are you on this issue, and where's the task force work?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Ranking Member. Specifically on the FEMA Delphi issue, yeah, as soon as I became aware that we have been in close contact with states, we did establish a task force. I think they are diligently working through all of the potential impacts here. I think when you have an issue of a $3.5 billion discrepancy, we want to make sure that we have looked at every angle here. And so I am hopeful that we'll be able to provide you a little bit more detail soon. But just my update here would be that we are working towards getting a resolution as quickly as we can.
Okay, so I mean, would that be end of summer or end of the year, or?
I would say as quickly as possible. Definitely this year. Some of this involves other coordination, and so I just want to. Okay. But we will continue to be in close contact.
Okay. Okay. It looks like I'm over my time by 3 minutes, but it doesn't. I don't feel like I've been that long, so I'm going to ask one more question.
Feels long to me, but that's okay.
Well, okay, we'll switch. That's pretty good. In January, NTSB Chair Homendy raised concerns about the safety impacts of electric vehicles on our roadways. I mean, in looking into this, the realization that these vehicles weigh a heck of a lot more than gasoline vehicles do. And so we reached out to FHWA to ask how you're planning to look at this from a future safety of our roadways. I'm sure it's going to have impacts on not just bridge safety, guardrails, and also impacts. Our response from them was, from you, was while FHWA doesn't currently have any research planned on how the weight and weight distribution of EVs may impact guardrails, bridge safety, and the longevity of the highway, safety is #1 priority. We know that safety is #1. Why does the agency not have any planned research in this area as we're being pushed in this area to move towards the EVs?
Thank you, Ranking Member, for that question. I will double check where we are in terms of research. I mean, size and weight is something that we take a look at, particularly with regard to bridges, and the performance of guardrail is obviously something that we would want to
Right.
understand the impacts. Just as a personal example, I have a minivan that has an electric battery in it, and it. I would want to, again, verify, but I feel like it's in the same weight range. But particularly as freight and some of these Class 8 haulers become electrified, that is something. So what I will do is I'll be happy to come back for you and get you some specifics around our research.
Thank you. I mean, this issue is raised by our state DOT, that they're concerned about what kind of impacts this could have on highway safety. So we'll follow up with that. Thank you.
Administrator Batt, first of all, welcome. It's nice to have you here. This past week, the Maryland Federal Congressional Delegation had our annual meeting with Governor Moore. He was here with his cabinet, with Secretary Wiedefeld, and they were very optimistic and very thankful for the support they've gotten from the federal government in the new programs. And the governor specifically mentioned the concerns of communities that have been adversely impacted from transportation programs and the use of our funds in order to deal with that. We had the Reconnecting Communities that's being implemented. But he also indicated that as we build new transportation programs, we need to be more sensitive to community needs. And part of the infrastructure bill was a significant increase in the Transportation Alternative Program, 10% of the formula funding. Can you just share with us how you are administering that program to make sure that the intent of Congress to help communities deal with transportation challenges under the Transportation Alternative Program is being implemented?
Thank you, Senator Cardin. And we have heard from communities across the nation, including in Maryland, how excited they are about the opportunity to transform their communities. I'll give you one very specific example. When it comes to complete streets, which are an important part of, active transportation and transportation alternatives, as an example, we have waived the local match on planning requirements around complete streets for communities who want to be able to access these funds, but may not, have the local match or the planning expertise in-house. So that's one example. I think Transportation Alternatives is a very important program, one that I've deployed in Delaware and Colorado, and happy to provide further details to your office.
I thank you. One of the areas that we are looking at is how we can deal with traffic safety, including the use of Transportation Alternative Program funding. I've introduced legislation, or working on legislation that would honor Sarah Langenkamp, who was a distinguished Foreign Service officer and a constituent who was killed while riding her bike in Bethesda. Legislation is being authored to allow the more liberal use of our funds for highway and traffic safety, including the TAP program. When we see the increased numbers of safety episodes of injuries and deaths on our highway, tell me the urgency of your efforts to deal with traffic safety.
Well, sir, I remember when I became the director of the Colorado DOT, we had 484 fatalities. When I left 3 years later, we were over 714, 10% increase year over year, the vast majority among vulnerable road users. And for me, as the steward of the Federal Highway Administration and our role there, I take every one of those fatalities incredibly seriously. We want to make sure that safety is out there and available for people who want to take alternatives like biking, like walking, and so it is an imperative for me as the Federal Highway Administrator.
So one of the challenges we have in multimodalism, which is a way in which we can really improve safety as well as convenience and a more efficient highway and transportation system, is to encourage more multimodalism, and we have that in our state. The challenge is that we have stovepipe funding in many cases, so it's hard to coordinate a multimodal forum. Tell me the efforts that you're making in order to encourage that type of transportation cooperation, which is in the best interest of our communities.
Yeah, I think that the Senator, thank you for that question. I think this is a primary focus for Secretary Buttigieg at USDOT, bringing in all of DOT approach. So we want to make sure that as communities are reaching out, whether it is federal highway funds or FTA funds or rail funds, as an example with reconnecting communities, that we are looking at it through a multimodal lens, so that the solutions that come out are the best ones for those communities and not a federally prescribed approach.
Thank you. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Senator Cardin, and thank you, Senator Capito, for this very good and important hearing. Mr. Administrator, thanks for being here. And I'm going to drill down a little more. I'm going to go back to Senator Capito's concerns about the proposed rule. And not only the lack of authority, I believe there's a lack of authority to do it, but also on the practicality of it. But first on the authority side, why? Before I get to why it's not going to work in North Dakota or other places that aren't going to require commuter buses or subways. In the Inflation Reduction Act, it dedicated $27 billion for a green bank, something that the EPA withdrew almost immediately after getting the authority to do it, and they created instead of this sort of slush fund for grants. Now, there's nothing new in the law that expressly prohibits such a thing, and this is this has been the tradition of decades of administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, to take the absence of a prohibition in a law that authorizes certain things as a license to do whatever's not prohibited. But I want to speak to two really big recent Supreme Court cases that, using the major questions doctrine, stating emphatically that agencies don't have authority that isn't given them in law. And that, of course, the first one being West Virginia versus EPA, and then the other one being the WOTUS rule. Now they're going to take up maybe a Chevron doctrine issue, and we'll see how that turns out. So I think it's becoming increasingly clear that the bureaucracy is not a fourth branch of government that are policymakers. First of all, so I want to ask you, what's your sense of the actual authority to do these things? But secondly, I want to stress that it's impractical in places, rural places especially. We just aren't going to build subways in North Dakota to get people to their farm. And so I would hope if this is going to proceed, I'd rather have you withdraw like you wisely did with the previous memorandum. But short of that, I hope there's consideration for the uniqueness or this, the different qualities of different places across our very diverse country.
Senator, I thank you for that question and statement. And I guess I would frame this, you had sort of a two-part
right.
piece there. So on the legal authority, I'm not a lawyer, but I start virtually all of my meetings within federal highways is we will follow the law. And we have lawyers on staff, and I take that very seriously. And so I don't want to opine as a lawyer. I will follow the direction that our lawyers give us on following the law very clearly. I hear you on the impacts, particularly for rural states and others around this piece, and not likely to build a subway around Devil's Lake. But I would simply say here on this piece that this bipartisan infrastructure law did have a climate change title in it, and from a performance management perspective, right? Like when I was in Delaware, it was hard to get folks to talk about performance management, bridge condition, pavement conditions. I think what we're trying to look at here is not sort of penalize states for their greenhouse gas emissions, but just get them to begin tracking greenhouse gas emissions as if 30% of our GHG is coming from the transportation sector, this is the piece of it, and maybe it's not a subway, but maybe it's alternative fuels, like other things, electric vehicles, other ways to drive that down. So I know it's become a very political hot button issue here, but as with most of my efforts, I try to just focus on here's what we're trying to get to, and we'll follow the law, but not to be punitive, but more from a tracking perspective.
And I appreciate that, but I also, on this particular topic, for example, while there's a title that relates to the basic issue, we discussed this specific issue and decided not to do it. In other words, there's not a lot of ambiguity about the intent of the Congress in this legislation. So again, your lawyers will duke that out, or they'll find some way around it, and eventually we'll, you know. But here's short of the Supreme Court weighing in specifically on a lawsuit on a rule that's so far not a rule, so I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But I think we have to consider that if we're going to be this sort of general with our authorities at the administrative level, the next administration might be of a different persuasion and take that slush fund at the EPA and say, hey, let's build a wall with solar panels at the southern border. And, you know, I mean, just, it seems extreme, and it probably is, but there's a lot less extreme examples that I could probably come up with that I think, you know, Democrats would find objectionable for good reason. So with that, I appreciate hanging in there with the law. I always dismiss the lawyers after I get their advice before I make big decisions. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bott, for being here. I would offer a different view than my distinguished Republican friends. I think that if Congress specifically authorizes you to do something, then that's good, and you have a clear direction from Congress. If Congress fails to specifically authorize you to do something, then what you revert to is your innate executive authorities. And if Congress wishes, it could forbid you to pursue those inherent executive administrative authorities, which they've done with things like Republican-driven efforts to prevent the IRS from policing political dark money. So there are examples of doing that. I don't think it's correct to say that when Congress considers a specific authorization and then doesn't pass it, that failure is a lawful restriction on your ability to do what you need to do using your innate administrative powers. And as a state, which has a coastline, which we believe is going to intrude quite far on our current seaside and bayside boundaries, predictably in years ahead, we're looking at very significant changes to the actual map of Rhode Island. So dealing with climate change responsibly is a deadly serious matter for my state. And I would strongly encourage you to pursue your greenhouse gas performance measures to the full extent of your executive authorities. It matters to states like mine that you get this right. And whatever pressure there is to the contrary, please remember those of us who are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, to the ocean acidification, to the ocean warming, to the sea level rise, to the coastal erosion, to the air quality effects, all of that. And I offer that as a contrary view to what Congress intended by not specifically authorizing you. The Bridge Investment Program, is that going to get another round of funding? Are you going to have another round of applications?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, bridge investment. There will be another round that comes out, I believe, this summer.
What's the timing for that, more specifically, if you know?
This more specifically, like other than this summer, like
Yeah, like do you have a date or a month?
July or August.
Sometime in July or August?
Yes.
Okay. And so you'll be accepting applications during that period for that second round?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you for that. I think that's all I have. Let me recognize Corey Baba from Newport, who's with us. Good to have a Rhode Islander in the House. And look forward to working with you to support you in every way possible on the emissions dangers and having proper information in order to assess and address those dangers appropriately. There are many, many, many Americans who are counting on you to make the right decision, not the one that the fossil fuel industry wants. Thank you.
Senator Merkley, we are waiting for Senator Ricketts, but we'll go with Senator Merkley. there's so much going on, so we're going to have a lot of in and out here.
Thank you very much, and appreciate your testimony and your work. A couple questions. I wanted to start with the issue that has been brought up in my state. Oregon's in the Cascadia subduction zone, and there's a lot of preparation for essential infrastructure to survive the big one, if you will. And we have been told by the Department of Transportation that they don't consider the need for seismic resiliency as relevant to a number of the grant pool applications. And that certainly is a concern. We're working to rebuild one of our bridges to make sure that there's at least one bridge that survives. And can you speak a little bit to why seismic resiliency is not considered a factor for you all in a number of these grant programs?
Thank you, Senator. And I'm always made aware when I travel to the West Coast and in these seismic zones, the just difference in bridge piers, and the size of those piers as compared to non-seismic activity. I would want to double check on that. I know that the Golden Gate large bridge investment that was made of around $400 million was a seismic retrofit for the Golden Gate Bridge, and that was a critical piece of that funding. So I would want to double check that where we stood on that.
Okay, I'd love to follow up with you in regard to the specific project and the concern that is relevant to the multimodal project discretionary grants, the Bridge Investment Program, and the RAISE grant program. And because a bridge may be functional now, but if we don't have any bridges that survive a quake, then addressing the emergency at that time is a real challenge, and thus trying to responsibly reinforce key infrastructure. I want to turn next to a project that really began with Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who served here previously. And they developed a program in his home state where along the highways they did pollinator plots and had different clubs maintaining different pollinator plots. And our highways create an enormous opportunity to address basically the pollinator Armageddon. We've lost massive numbers of butterflies and bees along our highways. One of the species that catches the public attention is the western monarch. The western monarch went from a high of about 10 million 40 years ago down to as low as 2,000 butterflies 2 winters ago. And it's had a couple good years, and then it had the huge storms in overwintering site in Southern California back this late winter, early spring this year. Another huge hit. And that pollinator butterfly, it travels 4 generations to go north, 1 generation to go back south to California. Nobody sees monarchs in Oregon anymore. They think they see them, and they're actually seeing like the yellowtail butterfly, because it's at least it's not orange, but it's yellow. So hey, close enough. Maybe I saw a monarch. And the bigger issue is that we could really have clubs sponsor plots of land along our north-south corridors, just as Tennessee did along their highways. And we got this bill, the Pollinator Friendly Practices on Roadsides Highways Right of Act, into the bipartisan infrastructure law. But you all haven't stood it up yet. And it's really an opportunity for folks to directly participate in establishing plots along these major corridors that would assist with all kinds of species. And I mentioned the monarchs, and people think, well, milkweed. Yes, milkweed is essential for the female butterflies to lay their eggs, but the adult butterflies need the pollinator flowers, just like other pollinators do, and so it would help a whole lot. Are you familiar with this program, and can you tell me how the stand-up is going?
Well, thank you, Senator. And I remember when I was the secretary in Delaware, we had a bee truck overturn on 95 and millions of bees and just trying to make sure that we were able to get that to a successful ending because of the importance of pollinators. I would want to double check and then come back to you exactly where we are in standing up that program, but I hear you on the importance of ensuring that, from an agricultural perspective and just from our natural environment, that those pollinators are critical.
You can imagine hundreds of clubs saying, just like they adopt a mile of highway now to keep it clean, saying, yeah, we want to do a little, we want to go seed pollinator nectar-producing flowers and milkweed, and contribute to a major opportunity to use the sides of our highways that are otherwise just not contributing much, but it's a perfect possible connection. And finally, I just wanted to encourage the work to roll out the EV charging stations. And I think the model for this program is that it has to be as easy to charge up as it is to fuel up. And if you've driven an electric vehicle any distance, you're probably aware that that's often not the case because of the great complexity of the different charging technologies that are out there by different companies. I really push the Department of Transportation to have a national standard so it is as simple to charge up as it is to fuel up. How do you see that program going?
Well, thank you, Senator. Obviously, the President has set a goal of 500,000 chargers, and I agree with you. If we're going to be successful with the EV rollout for the American public, that they do need to be able to charge as easily as they're able to fill up. I think that I would give the committee credit for the investments that are being made through the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're actually seeing the market moving now with the big announcement between Tesla, Ford, and GM, and lots of other companies now looking to move that standard. So I think that that is a very positive outcome, and hopefully one where we continue to see consolidation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Before I turn to Senator Ricketts, I apologize for being out of the room. We have hearings going on in other committees. In the Homeland Security Committee, in which I serve, they're having actually business of writing votes. So they need to drag me in there every now and then, so I apologize for leaving. While I was out of the room here, there was some discussion, and I just want to make a comment if I can. In my absence, I would have said something else if I'd been here, but there's been a fair amount of discussion on greenhouse gas performance measure and the fact that the bipartisan infrastructure law did not amend the performance measure section of law in order to require a greenhouse gas measure. And I would note that my own recollection is that our committee actually did consider a provision that would require a stringent greenhouse gas performance measure while also exempting half the states in the nation from that measure. We declined to include that language in favor of retaining the existing authority to set performance measures for environmental sustainability, which include greenhouse gas emission. And that authority was created by MAP 21 in 2012, and I'm glad that the Federal Highway Administration is still using that authority. Thank you. All right, let me yield now to Senator Ricketts for his questions. Go ahead, Senator Ricketts. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Chairman Carver, Ranking Member Capito.
Thank you for being such a faithful attendee.
No problem, my pleasure.
Hearing
I told you I love this committee.
We do too.
All right, so my first question, Administrator, is it bat or bot?
Whatever the pleasure of the committee, but generally bat.
Bat, okay, Administrator Bat. First of all,
But the guy from Delaware.
I heard Delaware.
We always call him bought and sold.
So first of all, I do want to thank your team for the relationship with the Nebraska Department of Transportation. Prior to me, I was governor. I got sworn in 2015. Prior to that, I think it was a pretty poor relationship between our Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration. And your team has really helped repair that. And I know that my first director, Kyle Schneeweiss, through John Selmer, now Vicki Kramer, appreciate the working relationship. So thank you very much for continuing to build upon that relationship. It's really important that we continue to work very closely between Federal Highway Administration and the state departments of transportation. So I really appreciate that. And I just also reiterate what Senator Capito said about making sure that our agencies take legislation that we pass and faithfully execute that legislation in the way that Congress intended it to be implemented. So thank you with that. And with that, I'd like to jump into the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and talk a little bit about the August redistribution. So I believe for fiscal year 2022, the August redistribution jumped up to $6.2 billion. And I think with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we can expect to see that August redistribution continue to climb. However, as you know, there's a very limited amount of time then with which departments of transportation, specifically the Nebraska Department of Transportation in my case, can take that, get that money back and redeploy it efficiently and effectively. And as that number becomes larger, that's going to become an increasing challenge. And we want to make sure, obviously, those dollars are spent effectively. What do you see with regard to that August redistribution, and how can we make that process one where departments, state departments of transportation will be able to have access to that money and be able to use it in a way that is not going to be inefficient?
Well, thank you, Senator. And yes, your first director that worked for you had a much more challenging last name than mine to pronounce.
And spell, too.
Yeah, but Kyle is a dear friend, and grateful that we are rebuilding that relationship in Nebraska. Look, you raise a very important issue, Senator, the August redistribution. In addition to the FEMA's Delphi issue, when I came in January, one of the first things that we did, we sat down with AASHTO at the TRB meeting in January to say that, listen, we were at $6.2 billion last year. We're going to be higher. We generally notify states in July of the impending August redistribution numbers. We've been in close contact with the states since basically March, saying this is coming, please get ready. What can we do to help you? What flexibilities can we get there? Our goal is to, and I know the AASHTO goal, and even within communities within those states, is to make sure that all of that OBLIM does get used, and that is one of our very primary focuses in the next few weeks.
So are there additional flexibilities or specific flexibilities that you have in mind to be able to give state DOTs so that they can, again, employ these dollars, especially as they get bigger, in a more effective way?
Senator, thank you for that. Yes, I say, and this is always very important for me, I say we have to follow the law.
Right.
But let
That's
us.
a good thing. Always follow the law.
Absolutely follow the law. But for each of our division administrators, when you are working with all of those states, whether it's West Virginia, Delaware, Nebraska, if the state has a creative idea that says, like, hey, we might be able to apply some of this OBLIM on a project here, and they have contract authority, we want to work. And then going forward, I think this is something that, because of the size of the bipartisan infrastructure law, if August redistribution is going to be at this level, it might be something we want to look at a legislative fix going forward.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Also, in relation to the IIJA, you've got these discretionary grants. And one of the things I'm hearing from folks in my home state is about the process, especially if you think about some of the smaller localities that would be able to apply for some of these grants, the challenge of getting through the application process. What sort of resources do you have, or do you think you can do for some of these localities to make it easier, specifically navigating like the BIL Launchpad, for example? I've heard some challenge with that, again, especially for smaller communities. What can you do to provide extra resources or make the process easier for those communities to be able to apply for these discretionary grants?
Thank you, Senator. And, I think what we want to make sure is that for all of these communities, whether they're large state DOTs or cities or smaller communities, we want to get them an award and then also get them across the finish line with a successful project. Yeah. We have LTAB, Local Technical Assistance Program, Tribal Technical Assistance Program. We've set up websites. The Secretary's office is very engaged. So if there are specific communities you'd like us to reach out to, we'd be happy to do that.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that offer. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn the time back over to you.
Very nice. Thanks so much. Senator Mark Zarais, Senator Arky, you are recognized.
Thank you so much,
for coming by.
Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Batt, it's good to see you again. And just want to come back to our favorite subject, the Cape Cod bridges, and the need to ensure that now that they're 9 months older than the last time you testified, that they are in even more desperate need of replacement. And if a severe storm were to strike Cape Cod, extremely worried that the bridges will become a bottleneck for residents and visitors seeking to evacuate, creating a very severe safety risk. So can you reaffirm your commitment to working with me to replace the Cape Cod bridges?
Thank you, Senator. And just as in my confirmation hearing, now I know them as the Bourne and Sagamore bridges, not just the Cape Cod bridges. And after Brent Spence, these are probably the bridge projects that I've heard quite a bit about in coming in. And absolutely, this is a priority focus for our administration, and happy to continue to work with you on it.
Yeah, it's just so important. It's the only way out for Cape Cod. Okay, so when that storm comes, and it's coming, just the evacuation will be catastrophic if those bridges aren't there. The highways and roads of the past splintered and displaced communities, and as we drive into our clean energy future, we can't greenlight more inequality. We have to put those injustices in the rearview mirror. In cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, majority white census tracts are more likely to have electric vehicle charging stations, and we're reckoning with that in Massachusetts. In Boston, most EV charging infrastructure is located in the Seaport, Fenway, Beacon Hill, but neighborhoods like Roxbury, Dorchester, and Charlestown have limited to no options. That's why last Congress, I introduced the Community Vehicle Charging Act, which would invest in EV charging infrastructure in environmental justice communities. Intentional and equitable deployment of electric vehicle charging must be a priority in the bipartisan infrastructure law implementation. And one way that Boston is increasing access is by deploying chargers in city-owned parking lots in low-income and black and brown communities. So, Administrator Batt, how does the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary community charging program help cities and states to tackle this conundrum of making sure that the charging stations are in inner-city communities?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Markey. And the significant investments in electric vehicles that this committee put forward in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are working with states on their NEVI programs and ensuring that, that they are adhering to the standards that we have put in place. CFI actually just closed the discretionary grant program on June 13th, so we are anticipating opening all of those applications, and that is a critical lens for us to make sure that we not only have the interstates covered, but also all of our communities and the very communities that you mentioned in your comments.
Okay, thank you so much. Very, very important. And do you think mobile charging has a role to play in the charging and fueling infrastructure program as well, particularly to provide resilience to charging systems in case of emergency?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I think that this is a very exciting time in this nascent industry. It's one that I think the president is very clear he wants America to lead in, and so we're going to look at an all-of-the-above approach to make sure that this transition is successful.
Yeah, and technical assistance is going to be very important for frontline communities to be able to apply for the bipartisan infrastructure bill programs and for the Inflation Reduction Act programs. Is the Federal Highway Administration supporting communities so that they can make the most of these funding opportunities in frontline communities?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I think what is both a blessing and a new burden is the fact that while we have traditionally worked with state DOTs to administer this program, there are many, many direct recipients. And so, again, as I said before, we want to make them successful in getting an award and also cutting a ribbon on that project.
Thank you. And finally, I was proud to secure $45 million in the 2023 Omnibus for my active transportation infrastructure investment program, which promotes walking and biking infrastructure and supports active transportation networks that allow people to safely travel without a car. And those active transportation networks reduce transportation emissions, increase mobility. So now that the program is officially funded, the Federal Highway Administration needs to deploy those funds as quickly as possible. So can you commit to swiftly implementing my active transportation infrastructure investment program.
Yes, Senator. I think everyone within Federal Highways knows that I am a huge supporter of active transportation.
Thank you. And Senator Sullivan and I, we partnered on that, and it's just amazing how much Alaska and Greater Boston have in common. And in that partnership, we can just see a future that works for everyone. Thank you.
You say Shaylin, Markey and Sullivan, Massachusetts, Alaska. It's a marriage made in heaven. And so, Danny, Senator Sullivan, you're on.
Mr. Chairman, I'm over here kind of cracking up because Senator Markey was mentioning his bill. I was just going to say it's really our bill, but I mean, he's the lead, but I think I was your lead Republican co-sponsor on that.
But I saved that.
You did.
I thought I did a good job of digging out of the hole I was in, you know?
So
I saved it.
So thank you. But Administrator, you're seeing some very important bipartisanship here, and I do want you to spend all that $45 million from our bill. Particularly, there's a project outside of Anchorage called Moose Loop, and if you can take a hard look at Moose Loop, this has a great potential. It's right up the alley of what Senator Markey was talking about. So. That's my first issue I wanted to raise with you. Have you heard of Moose Loop yet?
I have now, sir.
Okay, now you have, right?
Right. So in the Boston Public Gardens, we have Make Way for the Ducklings. Well, so maybe, it's not moose.
It's the same concept, just maybe a little bit bigger animals. So thank you, Senator Markey. In all seriousness, it was a great legislation. I was very honored to co-sponsor it, and I think it's going to benefit a lot of people across the country. So we'll send you info on Moose Loop. Let me get back to another issue that relates to Alaska. Administrator, we still got to get you up there, right?
It is on my list. Probably more summer than winter.
Okay.
But we'll do Moose
right.
Loop together.
Moose Loop, we can do that for sure. That's a good idea. I want to talk about another part of the infrastructure bill. I did vote for the infrastructure bill, which was the PROTECT program. And that's about resiliency. Alaska has more coastline than the rest of the lower 48 states combined. So when you talk about resiliency for coastal America, we're over 50% of it for the whole country. And you might remember, it didn't make a lot of press back here, but last fall, the west coast of Alaska got hit by a Typhoon Merbok, a very big storm that did a lot of damage. And our state DOT has been working with FEMA and your agency on faster ways to complete the repairs to the damaged infrastructure that took place after this typhoon. So I'm just wondering, what are you doing to implement the PROTECT program, particularly in the coastal communities in America, but in my state, given, like I said, that we constitute over 50% of all the coastline in America?
Well, thank you, Senator Sullivan. And I think that, whether it is a typhoon hitting Alaska or flooding in Kentucky and West Virginia, or, there's just no shortage of weather events that are testing the resilience of our system. And I remember being in Juneau a couple of years ago for the WASHTO events and hearing about some of the impacts of sea level rise and climate change there. I was just recently at the WASHTO event and met with the Alaska director of the DOT, deputy DOT, and talking about the very unique coastal aspects and needs. So specifically with PROTECT, we have distributed the funds to the states through the formula program and have also launched the discretionary program. So happy to visit with you if there are any discretionary opportunities, but share your concern and the importance for that program.
Okay, good. Let me mention another topic that I know you and I have talked a lot about. Senator Capito has been leading the charge on here in the Senate. And that, of course, is the ever endless goal of so many of us, including a lot of my Democratic colleagues, on permitting reform. Right? We have a system that is just dysfunctional, that it takes forever to get projects, whether roads or ports or bridges or mines or, energy projects off the ground. It hurts the country, hurts workers. It's just, and it's self-inflicted. So the infrastructure bill has some decent permitting reforms we negotiated here actually in this committee. Not enough in my view. And then so did the debt ceiling agreement. And so I have two parts to my question. One is, what are you doing to implement those? Very bipartisan. We want to keep them going. Certain groups in America don't like it, but they're definitely in the minority. And then second, with regard to permitting, one of the most egregious things that I've seen that really, really kind of is starting to put us in the world of, Venezuela and banana republics is, and I've seen it a lot in this administration, particularly as it relates to Alaska. We had a number of projects that went through final EISs, 6, 7 years, millions of dollars, got record of decisions from the previous administration, professional federal employees doing that. And this administration, the Biden administration, has come back and is looking at all these records of decision on infrastructure, on roads in Alaska, saying, you didn't consult enough, so we're going to reverse that. So literally opening up records of decisions that are 4 years old. I mean, this is just nuts. So any views on both of these both these issues relating to permitting in general, and then reopening records of decisions that are 4 years old? I mean, that's not the rule of law. It's not America. But the Biden administration is doing a lot to my state, and it's outrageous.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I would say on the first part, having been a state DOT secretary in 2 states, I have anxiously awaited a record of decision or a finding of no significant impacts. And as a project delivery person and coming from the private sector, before I took this job, I am always resolutely focused on the critical path. How can we deliver these projects on time and on budget? And from a federal highways perspective, recognizing that we are not a permitting agency, we're the ones who are actually going to our sister agencies who do issue the permits. However, we do have great relationships with Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, and so I think we're trying to leverage those relationships to try to get the important reforms that have been put in place. In terms of opening records of decision, I'd love to visit with you offline about that because, as I say, we want to follow the law, and that is my commitment that we will do that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. And Senator Fetterman, you're next. Senator Fetterman, you are recognized. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Thanks for coming. We had earlier today some comments about the tragic accident on 995, and if you want to make any comments with respect to that, feel free. You're recognized.
No, I would just really like to, the 95, obviously that, you're pretty much preoccupied with 95, and I know I certainly am too, and we know it's a major artery, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the East Coast. And a lot of Pennsylvanians are worried that the delays in repairs bring to its standstill deal. I'm glad to see last night you were so quick to get $3 million to the emergency relief. The funds got out so quickly. Just personally, it just seemed $3 million wasn't enough. I mean, it seems like it's going to be even a lot more expensive than that. But I get the sense, President Biden, I was standing next to a collapsed bridge in western Pennsylvania, and things moved down really quickly and got it down. And I'm confident that the same is going to happen, in East Pennsylvania as well. But right now, you have an incredible asset in SEPTA, and it's the regional rail and subway lines, that I think could be a game changer if SEPTA still needs support to expand temporary capacity to ease congestion on the roads. And my question to you, Administrator, could you emergency relief on other funds at your agency could help SEPTA's temporary operating costs to make transit a viable alternative for local travel? And will you commit to working with Secretary to get the SEPTA support in the next few weeks?
Thank you, Senator, and I know how important this project is, and Senator Chairman Carper had reached out to me on Sunday, and I know had connected us. I know you're very engaged on this. With specifically to the $3 million on the quick release, all of the costs of this will be borne through the emergency relief program. The $3 million is sort of a down payment. It's about a 10% estimate of what they think they're going to need. If that number goes up, we'll provide more funding. But that was the reason for the $3 million. Specifically on SEPTA, I was with Leslie Richards, who's the general manager of SEPTA yesterday. Secretary Buttigieg was briefed on that. And again, back to this concept of following the law, Federal Highway ER funds specifically relate to added capacity on SEPTA, and we are working to stand that up. Secretary Buttigieg has also asked us to look with FTA what provisions they may have, but SEPTA is a critical link here for that corridor.
Yeah. While I'm here, I also want to talk about the federal government's dragging its feet in implementing expert advice and making streets safer as well. And so I reached out twice to express my concerns about the actions of your agency should be making streets safe, and frustration delays have been witnessing with some key guidelines. When can we expect that these actions will be finalized and will commit to working with my office to address the concerns that I've raised?
Thank you, Senator. I think Secretary Buttigieg is very clear that safety is our #1 priority, and as part of the National Roadway Safety Strategy, safe streets, safe design, safer speeds, these are all things that we talk about incessantly within Federal Highways. So happy to follow up with your staff around any concerns you may have raised so that we can more quickly deploy safety in our system.
Okay, thank you. And I look forward to your response for my other questions. So thank you very much, Administrator.
Thank you, sir.
And I cede my balance to the chair.
The chair is happy to have it. We'll turn to the issue of I-95. I'm sure a little bit later in the hearing, but thank you, Senator Fetterman. Okay, I think Senator Lummis, you're next, and following you is Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, truck parking. I have a bill with Senator Kelly called the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, where we're going to authorize some additional funding to your agency to address the backlog. But as we continue to debate that bill, I'm interested to hear what work are you doing now on this issue?
Thank you, Senator Lummis. And I remember when I was a Colorado DOT director, we would get the closure notices for I-80 often, and we would start reaching out to our commercial vehicle partners to let them know that they didn't need to come up, and we'd try to stop them before they got up and got stacked up too much. So this is a critical issue for us. I would say this is an eligibility that we have extended through our formula funds, and there are even discretionary grants that have been awarded that involve truck parking. So I know this is something that myself and Secretary Buttigieg are supportive of.
Well, thank you. We just had an absolutely outrageous winter in Wyoming this year. And road closures were extremely common, and I think are bound to continue to be so. You know the challenges of that high plains environment. Okay, I want to switch to the Inflation Reduction Act a little bit, a few questions about that. So last year, I had major concerns regarding the program that the IRA created It's called the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant Program. My concerns there are, I don't want it just to be a way to funnel taxpayer dollars to urban areas and neglect rural areas. Can you give me some assurance that that's not happening? Or do you have some information about how that money's going out? How's it being awarded?
Thank you, Senator. Obviously, for any of the discretionary programs, we will issue a notice of funding opportunity that has great detail and prescribes how we award the funding. I'm quite certain we've got examples of rural communities that have received funds, and so I'd be happy to follow up with you directly after the hearing.
Super. I'll look forward to that. And I want to touch on some issues yet that were also discussed by Senator Sullivan. The environmental review system is effectively broken, and it really affects highway dollars because of the massive increase in inflation in the construction industry. It exceeds inflation in other areas of our economy, so delays in construction are hugely costly. So I've introduced a bill, it's called the Interactive Federal Review Act, and it's to test interactive cloud-based platforms that are estimated to shorten the time spent reviewing the documents for large projects by as much as half. So have you had a chance to look at this idea, and do you believe a step like that could help expedite project delivery?
Yeah, Senator Lemus, thank you for that comment and that work. I was in the private sector before I came to this role, and digital delivery, digital tools for construction, and bringing all of that digital NEPA processes, I think, are something that are very exciting. So happy to work with your office on that. Just on the inflation piece, you know, I was in a global transportation role, and I would just say inflation is a huge issue in America for our transportation projects, but inflation was also an issue in the Middle East around transportation projects, in the UK, in Asia. I mean, there's sort of a global issue with commodities now, and so I just wanted to highlight that it's a challenge we're dealing globally, not just here in the U.S.
Good point. I want to run another thing by you that also deals with these types of delays. Congress updated the categorical exclusion in the IIJA for projects with limited federal funding, $6 million. So now that inflation has made a $6 million contribution of federal funds to a project, such a small contribution that you can't effectively use categorical exclusions, I'm inclined to want to raise the CADX amount to like 12 million, double it, so it can be meaningfully used instead of being almost irrelevant. Do you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Senator. Happy to work with your staff to evaluate what that right number would be. We want to be able to use a CE whenever possible. And I think, you know, your notes on inflation, I'm very focused on project delivery. And if we can deliver these projects on time, it's going to help on the inflation issue as well.
And can I ask one more question about that?
No.
In your experience,
No, go ahead.
In your experience, what advantages does it give a project to qualify for a categorical exclusion?
So from my experience, if you can get a CE, then you're not looking at doing the higher levels of environmental review, but that's always correlated with the impacts to a project, right? So you know, if it's a major bridge project that has water impacts and, you know, potentially some tribal impacts or other issues there, that's where you're going to start to add time and review because there's just greater impacts from a project.
But the structural integrity of the project has to be evaluated regardless of whether you have a Cat X or not.
Thank you, Senator. So structural design elements would be different than the environmental impacts of a project.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lamas, thanks as always for joining us. Senator Kelly, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Administrator Bott, thanks again for being here and great to see you. I want to start by discussing a project to widen Interstate 10, which goes through Arizona, goes all the way across the country, in fact, but the area between Phoenix and Tucson is a problem. Every single day, there is an accident that backs up this stretch of highway for hours. And it's because there are portions of this highway that are just 2 lanes in each direction. And it is a major safety issue. It's also worth noting that this stretch of roadway that I'm talking about is within the Gila River Indian community, yet the infrastructure does not currently exist to adequately connect the community to this critical transportation corridor. You know, fortunately, the Arizona Department of Transportation, the Gila River Indian community, and local leaders from throughout Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties in the state of Arizona have come together to support a comprehensive plan to add an extra lane to the interstate in each direction and add several critical interchanges to improve connectivity for the Gila River Indian community. To date, the state of Arizona and the Maricopa Association of Governments have committed more than $850 million in state and local transportation funding to complete this project. It's a lot of money. We're hoping to make up the remainder of the funding with either an infra or a mega grant this year. Administrator Batt, can you provide any indication of when you expect the notice of funding opportunity for the infra and mega grants?
Thank you, Senator Kelly, and I'm very aware both of the importance of that interstate to those communities, Phoenix and Tucson, and then also as a vital freight corridor for the United States. I am happy to be in contact with Director Toth as well, if that would be helpful. I will give you specifics, but we have so many of these NOFOs that are coming out. But again, I would believe that that would be one that would be coming out in the next, in the summer time frame as well.
Okay, sometime in the summer. Can you get back to us with a specific date?
Absolutely, sir.
Back to my office, thank you. As you know, we applied for one of the mega grants last year for this specific project. We didn't receive it. After that decision, I heard concerns from some in Arizona that the project was not selected in favor of some multimodal projects. Well, I know you cannot comment on a specific project. Can you speak more broadly about whether projects to expand interstates, especially in fast-growing states like Arizona, could be competitive for a future mega or an infra grant award?
Thank you, Senator. I think that what we always want to make sure is that I think we think that states and locals are the ones who make the best decisions about their transportation needs, and happy to work with those communities. And I think on mega, I think we're probably weeks, not months away on mega. Yeah, from a look, I'd be happy to.
Is there any reason why adding additional lanes to an interstate would not qualify for a mega grant?
I know there are some of the carbon reduction program grants that specifically forbid it, but there is nothing expressly in the law that would prevent a capacity under some of these programs.
Okay, and last year there were 9 mega grants awarded. I think that was the number, and none of these projects, we took a look at them closely, none of them appeared to be located on tribal land or meaningfully serve tribal communities. So can you speak to the work that Federal Highways is doing to ensure that tribal communities are able to apply for and be competitive for grant funding opportunities like the mega and infra grants?
Thank you, Senator. And, I worked closely with the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe in Colorado when I was the director there, and I'm aware of the sometimes the unique circumstances there. We have a tribal technical assistance program that we work directly with tribes to help them apply, and happy to connect with your office to provide more details.
Helping them apply, does that also help them be competitive?
I believe those two would be synonymous, but I want to just double check.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator, thank you, Senator Capito.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go back to one of the questions that I had asked you about the safety on EVs, and we talked about the weight limits. So my crack staff got me this from NTSB head Homendy was quoted as saying the Ford's F-150 Lightning EV pickup is 2,000 to 3,000 pounds heavier than the same model's combustion version, and the Mustang Mach-E electric SUV and the Volvo EC40 EV, she said, are about 33% heavier than their gasoline counterparts. So this is an issue. And so I would just encourage you at the department, among all of your other things, is to look at, as this increases in a number of EVs, what it's going to do to our safety impacts on the highway, because I think it will have an impact. We know weight has impact on damages. I want to ask about Buy America. I'm understanding that there are inconsistencies with the implementation of Buy America, Build America provisions that we put into the IIJA, and it's kind of got a patchwork of state implementation challenges causing some confusion. So FHWA will play a major role in the Buy America waiver process. If not handled, this could bring some of our projects to a halt. And I'm hearing Buy America on all kinds of different issues, and it goes back to the supply issues that Senator Lomas was talking about. Can you talk about the waiver process at FHWA and how you're preparing, and what kind of for the influx of requests that are going to be coming in the future as this market tightens?
Thank you, Ranking Member, and yes, your crack staff, I'm sure, provides you with a lot of information. I would say very specifically on the Buy America, when I hear the President speak, I think I hear him talking about the transformational aspects of the law and building projects and improving our infrastructure. And with equal passion, I hear the President talk about rebuilding the economy and ensuring that these are good-paying American jobs and these products are built here. And so there is as we are rebuilding our industrial capacity around some of these projects that are being reshored now, and we're getting battery plants built here, there is going to be a tension between getting projects built quickly and then getting those projects made with products that are made here in America. And so we're just going to have to find a way to thread this needle of ensuring that we're getting projects done quickly, and then finding appropriate waivers to make that happen, but making sure that we're also rebuilding the industrial capacity here in the country.
Are you finding a larger influx of requests for waivers?
Ranking Member, I would say that I would have to go back and double check, but yes, generally we are hearing.
And you have do you have the mechanisms set up to be able to address that growing challenge within the department?
Yes, so every waiver request that would come in, we have a process for evaluating, yes.
Okay. Let me ask about one federal decision, because I've been touting that as a way to streamline, and obviously it was in the debt bill that we just passed for other projects. And there's concern, I think, and has this been implemented enough to really make a difference? Are you seeing more streamlined implementation on these projects? You would know, coming from the state sector, whether it's moving faster. How many projects are on track to achieve that 2-year goal of for the EISs? Are you utilizing the provision that requires one environmental document? I mean, talk about one federal decision, your implementation, and some of these specifics that I've mentioned.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And I would say, as somebody with a project delivery background, I appreciate these efforts, to just get greater clarity and accelerate project delivery. I am happy to come back with very specific lists of projects that we're implementing some of these reviews on. I would say, like, for all of these major projects, these are big, thorny issues. I think this is one of the areas where Mitch Landrieu, who works directly for the president on project delivery, is constantly saying, how can we get these agencies to work together better? So I would say that we have great awareness and great cooperation with the resource agencies. And right now, it's just a matter of getting through some of the processes so we can get to these decisions in a more quickly.
Are you seeing the end result here yet of this one federal decision?
I would say that I personally can think of examples where we are actively engaging with resource agencies proactively. We're talking about the timelines that have been established. I've been in the role for 6 months, so I don't know if I can say that I've got a project that went from start to finish in that 2-year time frame.
Okay, so we need to keep following up on that. And then lastly, you testified that FHWA is administering nearly 900 awards, and this sort of follows on to that one federal decision. I guess we could follow up with you and your staff more specifically. How many of those awards actually have project grant agreements in place? Are we getting to the end point here? I mean, you have a lot going on. We understand that, but are the awards being made in a timely fashion to satisfy you? Because we're hearing some blowback on that.
Thank you, Ranking Member. So we are working very closely with any of the award recipients to make sure that there's a grant agreement in place, that we are going to get them successfully, because some of these programs have construction timeframes around obligation or getting money obligated within timeframes, and so we want to make sure, and happy to provide you and your staff with any timelines and updates on project lists.
We would like some specific data on that, following up on your opening statement. But thank you for being here, and thank you for everything that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Senator Capito. I've got a couple of questions, and then right at the end, I'm going to return to I-95 and any last thoughts you have, especially on the wake of what I think the governor of Pennsylvania has announced earlier here today. First, a question dealing with EV charging standards. And this week, Ford and General Motors announced that they will rely on Tesla's charging technology for their electric vehicles as well. And since those three companies together represent, I think, about 75% of EV sales in the U.S., this indicates some industry consolidation around the North American charging standards, or NACS. Federal Highway Administration rules require companies seeking EV charging grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law to use an alternate standard, the Combined Charging System, or CCS. Question: how does the existence of multiple industry standards affect the build-out of EV charging infrastructure, and what is the role of your agency, FHWA's role in facilitating convergence around a single standard? And sort of a corollary to that is, additionally, if a single charging technology emerges as an industry standard, how will the Federal Highway Administration make sure that it's open, accessible, and reliable for all EVs?
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you, Chairman Carper. And I think that a couple of things. I think that the public should recognize that the coalescing of Ford, Tesla, and GM, kind of a new big three on EVs, is in no small part due to the investments that have been made by the bipartisan infrastructure law, President Biden's focus on this, and it is great to see private sector coming together and working to get a standard, right? I think that's part of our challenge as we're rolling out this new program, is we're making live decisions, and the world is moving and evolving as we move forward. You know, as somebody who has an electric vehicle that has a CCS charger, I want to make sure that I'm able to charge. I think one of the things that we're reassured by is that there are adapters that are available, right? So if if for some reason the industry moves in a certain direction, this is not like a very finite, like you either have to choose one or the other right now. But we are, I think, excited to see industry coming together, and we'll work with our public sector partners to make sure that we're trying to move in concert as much as possible.
Good. As an electric vehicle owner, I feel the same sentiment that you've just expressed. Climate title rollout. The threat of climate change means we must urgently reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're trying to do that, and just as urgently ensure that our transportation systems are resilient to the inevitable increase in natural disasters that are already being witnessed across the country. I strongly supported the inclusion of an historic climate title in the bipartisan infrastructure law, including discretionary grants to build out EV charging in communities and to increase resilience. I'm somewhat concerned, though, having said that these discretionary grant programs have been slow to be implemented, and that no funds, I'm told, no funds have been awarded yet. Here's my question: does Federal Highway Administration have the staff resources that it needs to promptly begin awarding grants and meet the urgency of the moment in implementing the climate title?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. I think that one of the things that I've been very focused on is turning awards into projects. Since I've been coming here, I know that Secretary Buttigieg is also very focused on this. I'll just give you one very specific example. On CFI, we had initially had a deadline in May for those communities to submit their applications, and because we got a lot of requests for more time, because these communities wanted to be successful in applying, we actually extended the deadline to June 13th. So some of it is us. There's a lot of new programs, Federal Highways staff, and again,
that was yesterday.
What's that?
Just yesterday.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. But yes, yesterday was the deadline there. But again, I can't stress this enough. I think Federal Highway staff, since this law was enacted, have been working around the clock to get all of these programs stood up, and we will continue to work like that. But it's a balance of we want to move swiftly, but also thoughtfully to get to successful outcomes.
And this, I think you've in part answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How is Federal Highway Administration working with states to ensure that states prioritize investments in EV charging infrastructure?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. Yes, I think we have a robust discussion with our state partners around NEVI, approving their plans, looking at some of the exceptions that they've asked for as they look to stand up these alternative fuel corridors. I think just like when the interstate system was built, we want to make sure that this EV network is one that Americans can go coast to coast and community to community without fear of not being able to charge.
Oh, good. Bus rapid transit. I remember the first time I heard of this program, I thought, well, that's a clever idea. I wish I'd come up with that. But the bus rapid transit systems provide, as you know, fast, I think in many cases reliable, high quality public transportation routes, and they're being adopted, I'm happy to see, in cities across the country, and offer a way to connect in part suburbs to job centers and to expand access to rail networks, among other things. The bipartisan infrastructure law provides new eligibility for states to use formula dollars to build bus rapid transit systems. I think this may have been raised when I was out of the room attending my other markup on their business meeting, my other committee, but I missed this. But how is Federal Highway Administration providing information to states about the opportunities to build bus rapid transit systems? And a corollary to that, in general, how is Federal Highway Administration coordinating with the Federal Transit Administration to facilitate multimodal investments?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. When I was Delaware Secretary, we also ran DTC, so very familiar with transit operations. And I would say that from a federal highway perspective, we are constantly making states aware of their, and I think the states are aware of their eligibility for flexing highway dollars for transit. We work very closely, Nuri and I, the FTA administrator, are often in close communication, the Secretary's office. I think we're bringing a multimodal approach more so than any other Department of Transportation has had that focus.
All right, thank you. We talked earlier about the alarmingly high number of pedestrians who are dying in this country, and I think the fatality level has reached its highest level in decades, maybe 40 years or so. And and the fatalities increased during the pandemic because despite an overall decrease in driving, people just drove less, but we saw continue to see an increase. But the bipartisan infrastructure law invests, as you know, heavily in safety, particularly for pedestrians, for bicyclists, and other vulnerable road users. And it also directs U.S. DOT to reconsider some of the manuals and procedures that govern road design. The U.S. DOT has also released a safety strategy that recognizes the danger that high speeds and overbuilt road designs pose to vulnerable road users. Question: how has U.S. DOT safety strategy informed the Federal Highway Administration and the administration's implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law? And is the Federal Highway Administration considering or reconsidering design guides and procedures to discourage higher speeds?
Thank you, Chairman Carper. I think that Secretary Buttigieg often speaks about his focus on safety. The National Roadway Safety Strategy incorporates safe design, safer speeds into this. And I think as a Federal Highway Administrator, what I often tell our folks and our state partners is we need to differentiate our interstate system from where those interstates become arterials and those arterials become city streets. And I spoke at NACTO earlier this year, and we really want to partner with communities, who want to enact lower speed limits in these cities. I think what we're learning sort of globally is that the cities that get the best outcomes and the safest cities are the ones where people feel safe to walk and bike, and we want to make sure that we're not just thinking about moving cars and trucks, but we're creating these places where people feel safe to be active in their transportation.
All right, thank you. I have just given a notice that if I want to ask questions at the Finance Committee hearing that's going on right now, I need to wrap this up. But before we do that, the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, has made some announcements this morning that I think are relevant to the discussion we're having today. And if you could just share with us just briefly what he's announced and your reaction to what he's announced, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair and Chairman Carper. And yes, I've been in the hearing, so I'm not sure specifically what he announced, but it was my understanding that he was going to detail the timeline for the expected repair. And I think that where we were thinking it might be several months, I think that PennDOT has come up with an expedited plan. I was part of those discussions yesterday, but I think it's going to be an innovative fix that will get us to a resolution much quicker and restore traffic on I-95, which is, crippling that region right now. And so just really grateful for the innovation of PennDOT and the cooperation of Philadelphia and our regional partners and the Federal Highway Administration.
Great. Any question that you hadn't been asked that you'd like to be asked?
I have several, sir, but I want you to get to your Finance Committee before.
My staff will appreciate that. I just want to say how what a joy it's been to sit here today and to hear from you and to hear your responses to the questions that have been asked. For the other people in the room who may not know this, I was given the opportunity to suggest folks to a newly elected president a couple of years ago to people to serve in his administration, and Shailen Bhatt was one of the people I was especially pleased to recommend. And sitting here listening to you today, responding to questions and doing it in a really forthright and frank way, knowledgeable way, makes me very happy. And to your family who are sharing you with all of us across the country, give them your wife and you have one child, is that?
2 daughters.
2 daughters, two girls. Tell them that we appreciate them sharing their husband and dad with the rest of us, all right? And let's see here, I think some boilerplate that I have to mention. In closing, I want to thank our witness, Administrator Shaylin Bott and Souls, for his time and testimony today. And as we've heard today, the Federal Highway Administration faces no shortage of important work as it continues to implement the critical programs that are authorized and funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and in part by the Inflation Reduction Act. And we thank you for your willingness to serve, to lead the Federal Highway Administration at this pivotal time for rebuilding America's transportation infrastructure. And we'd ask that you convey to the team that lead, the team members that you lead across the country, our thanks, bipartisan thanks, for the good work that's being done. Everything I do, I know we can do better. I think the same is true for Federal Highway Administration. And we just, I know, what does it say in the Constitution? In order to form a more perfect union, in the preamble, we're never going to be perfect, but that's our goal, and we're going to continue to strive to do that. And we appreciate the spirit in which you lead this agency. Thank you. And I think senators are going to be allowed to submit written questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, June 28th. And we'll compile those questions. That's 2 weeks from today. We'll compile those questions, send them to the Federal Highway Administration, and ask that they be responded to by you and your team by Wednesday, July the 12th. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. Thank you so much.